So in this video, I want to cover some of the challenges of the no-self philosophy. Of course, if it were easy, if you just flicked a switch and you had no self and you saw through the illusion and you could put all the luggage of suffering down and live a peaceful life, then we would all be doing it. But there's something about the program. It's a very sticky, persistent program. And so it's like we're all, grabbing the bars of a prison cell and we're just shaking them like, let me out. And we don't recognize that we're already out. We're out looking in but still trying to get out. It's like the mind trying to get out of mind using mind. Or imagine if you had your main goal was to lose all your money. So you take all your money and you buy more money with it. And you keep thinking that's going to somehow lose all the money that you have, but you just get more. And that's the way mind works. The more the mind tries to lose itself, the more mind you end up with. And of course, when the Buddha talked about no self, it was always, look, everything changes. That's the shortest definition of Buddhism. Everything is in flux. And so, of course, there can't be a stable, solid, coherent self because everything changes. And, of course, even a little examination shows how much the self changes even across a few minutes. And also, if the self were real, it would have some kind of control over the situation, and that's just not the case. I mean, the self can't even control thoughts, and the fact that you may have intrusive thoughts is the best evidence you can find that there is no controller of the thinking mind. And one of the things that I don't hear very much about is just, and I did a video on this, but how strange it would be. I did a post on social media that I think it was something like the notion that there's a little self inside the skull is actually more frightening than anything Stephen King ever came up with. Because when you start pondering, like, okay, if there is a little self somewhere up in this, what does it look like? Does it look like a set of neurons? Because do you really want to identify with a bunch of neurons, a neural network? Do you want to identify with some kind of parasite that might be up there? I mean, all of it is a little strange when you really dig a little deeper with it. So in this video, what I want to do is turn things around a little bit with the no-self philosophy. Because when we practice it, it's always, can I experience the no-self up here in my skull? But when the Buddha talked about no-self, he wasn't just talking about you. He was talking about all the people you have relationships with. So all the other humans that you talk to, there's no self in them either. They're simultaneously experiencing the self-illusion, just like you are. And the question gets to, okay, well, all these people I have relationships with, what am I relating to? Is my thought, so I did a video on this, remember, it's the process of thinking that gives rise to the notion that there must be a thinker behind the thoughts. That is the self. And so if we could just stop thinking, all the self-illusions would stop. But of course, that's not going to happen. So when we engage in thought, we create the illusion of a self. But that same process gives rise to the illusion in those around us as having selves. And so that person may be simultaneously experiencing the self-illusion, and they may be conjuring up some self inside their skull, and they're conjuring up an image of a self in your skull. And those selves may not have anything to do with each other. And there's a sense where we get this, where we may talk with someone and we recognize that that person doesn't, their version of who they thought I was isn't even close, which is to say my self-illusion is quite different than the self-illusion they're conjuring up in their own skull about me. And so what is it that we can relate to? Because these types of relationships all seem so superficial, and they absolutely are. They're one illusion relating to another. And so what's behind it? And so when you start considering the possibility that these people, even people you're close to, you're saying, well, but I love, these are people they're so dear to me, and what's the connection? Why am I connected to this person? Well, actually, that's part of seeing through the self-illusion, both in yourself, but also in the other. Once you see that this ego is just an idea, both in myself, but also in the other, and you let those clouds of thinking dissipate, you find that behind all of that is consciousness that kind of got lost in me and lost in you, and it finds itself again. And that is often described as either a meaningful connection or sometimes love. And so consciousness seeing its re-experiencing itself in the other. And that's so much deeper than any type of ego relationship we might have with another person. And so just to give you a couple other hints about why it's so difficult for us to break down the self-illusion in other people. Let's take a look at some of these people who are supposedly beyond self-illusion. In other words, they've convinced us that they somehow have seen beyond the self-illusion. And notice how once that happens, our image of who we think they are, in other words, our self-image, our self-projection into their skull, it still seems to stick because we expect something. We expect that once they see through the illusion, somehow that little self has changed. And it can be really, really subtle because consider that Eckhart Tolle, he has caught so much criticism because he loves coffee and he likes red wine. And so he may have a glass or two of red wine and people are like, wow, how can you do that? That doesn't seem right, because once you see through the self-illusion, for some bizarre reason, your meat suit should not be ingesting the substance. And of course, Nisargadatta was more extreme because he smoked all the time, and people think, well, if you see through the illusion, shouldn't you do this behavior or not do this behavior? Alan Watts, of course, both smoked and drank. And of course, people, again, would say, well, once you see through the self-illusion, something must change. And of course, so many spiritual teachers have been caught giving into the flesh, and too many to go into. And so that, again, calls into question, like, okay, what am I dealing with? You? Is that ego really out there in that skull, or am I dealing with the thought of who I think you are? And well, you've probably figured it out at this point. The people around you, if you're only dealing with things at that ego relationship level, you're dealing with the thoughts in your own head. There is no other out there. And so I want to end, and so the practice of this is, even for the rest of the day, when you're dealing with the people around you, consider for a moment, ponder for a little bit, that you're not relating to them. If you're only at the ego level, you're not relating to them at all. It's your mind's construct of your sense of self relating to your mind's construct of who you think you're dealing with. And if that's the limits of the relationship, then that's the limits of the relationship. But at least have that recognition. Because when you have the recognition, there's those moments where you can go beyond, and then you get to, wow, this is consciousness, recognizing consciousness. And if it doesn't happen, then it doesn't happen, but it may. But I want to leave because of, have advice in this, and I was giving, pointers here and there. But I want to remind, I call these D-minders, one by Ram Dass, which is one of my all-time favorites. And because again, it hints at the playfulness of all this. So even though I've said all this in it's been 7 or 8 minutes. So whatever I said in the last 7 or 8 minutes, remember to end with this. All spiritual practices are illusions created by illusionists to escape illusion. And that's a classic by Ram Dass. Maybe.